these make my heart beat just a little bit harder, and my chest puff out a little bit, sometimes even make my neck swell up a bit. Do they do that to you as well? The story goes that another founder, Edward Partridge, was listening to that talk by Patrick Henry at the Second Virginia Conference, and he was listening through a window from the outside. And he was so moved by Patrick Henry's words that he asked his friends to bury him on that very spot. And 35 years later, they did just that. I don't believe, though, that the liberty or death part of that speech is the most inspiring or the most important words Patrick Henry spoke that day. We'll get back to that in just a minute. Another favorite quote from the founding era is attributed to Sam Adams. He said, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." Do these words and other words like that make you want, like it makes me want, to pledge, just like the signers of the Declaration of Independence did, your life, your liberty, your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor? That phrase has been used a few times today, and I think we need to think very seriously about it. Before you really answer that question, though, however, you need to really think it through, because theoretical or hypothetical situations have a tendency to turn into reality. And besides that, it's a little bit of a trick question. The hat I'm wearing bears the brand of a hero of mine. He died in a snowbank along a rural stretch of highway in Oregon a few years ago. LaVoy Finicum gave his life. He didn't just pledge it, he gave it. There are people in this room, in this state, that have contributed what can only be considered fortunes in the causes of campaigns, of, unfortunately, since our opponents like to engage in lawfare, they've contributed to litigation, of which I've been a party, as Marty alluded to. The Halversons, the Dens, the Brophies, and many others have contributed fortunes to these causes, and I don't know where the rest of us would be without it. They gave of their fortunes. Now, I'm not on the Sainthood for Donald Trump committee, but I don't believe any man should ever have to endure the character assassination that that man has. And we in the Republican Party leadership in Uintah County have had a little bit of a taste of that over the last year and a half, and I can tell you it's not any fun. You may very well be called upon to give up your reputation, maybe just for a period of time, maybe for the rest of your life. But pledging becomes giving, and you need to be ready for that. Now you may ask, why is it a trick question? And that's because we're all familiar with what the signers of the Declaration of Independence pledged, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. But how many of us remember what they pledged it to? Does anybody? They pledged it to each other. Not to a cause, not to a nation, not to liberty, not to a revolution. They pledged it to each other. And that's what we have to do as well. What does that mean? It means that it's not about me and it's not about you. It's about us coming together for a common cause. If you happen to be an elected official, then it means that you approach all legislation with two questions in mind. Is it constitutional? And how will it affect my constituents? Nothing about how well I like the sponsor or whether or not he's going to vote for my bill. Constitutionality and the effect that it has on your constituents. That's what we sent you there for. That's it. It also means that you build consensus among like-minded conservatives that are all trying to do the same to accomplish the same goals. You don't get involved in personality conflicts. You don't engage in pissing contests about who gets to be in what clique or what club or what caucus. You work together for us because that's why we sent you there. It certainly means that you don't vote to remove the committee assignments of a senator just because he's a little hard to get along with. I understand that some people don't like Senator Bouchard. Hell, I don't like Senator Bouchard. Jefferson didn't like Adams either, but they were able to work together to get the job done. And those of you that we send to Cheyenne should be willing to do exactly the same thing. And that brings me to my final point. And this is probably the one that's going to lose me more friends than anything else I might say today. Earlier we heard from Scott Heiner and again from Mike Schmidt about the problems, some of the problems that we have in our legislature. Rules being twisted and used against us, and a bunch of maneuvering and dishonesty. When we get those problems solved, and Scott gave us an idea of how to go about starting to solve them, when we get those solved, then we'll be able to run 3 or 4 or 5 or however many candidates you want to run for a specific seat or position in our government. But until we do, if we're running 2 conservatives against 1 rhino, we're doing it wrong because we're going to split the vote. I met Scott several years ago on the campaign trail. We were both running for House District 18, and neither one of us won because we split the vote. And a rhino got that seat. 2 years later, I called Scott and I said, Scott, are you going to run again? And he said, Lyle, I was about to call you and ask you the same thing. We came together because it wasn't about me and it wasn't about Scott. It was about us coming together to get the job done. We met, and the result is the Representative Heiner that you guys know and love now, like we've known and loved for years. That's what happens when it's not about me or you, but it's about us. On the other hand, it sometimes is about a personality or an individual, and what happens is not good. Last election cycle, I was approached to run for Senate District 14. I have lived in that district for nearly 2 decades. I've campaigned from one end of it to the other for candidates, myself sometimes, other people at other times, and for causes. I know that district well. My opponent, the incumbent, had recently been named Rhino of the Month by WYOMING. So I thought, you know, I might have a pretty good shot. I'm going to do that. And I said yes. Then a man named Rex Rammel rode in on his imaginary white horse. Rex had recently purchased a commercial building in Pinedale and was converting it into a veterinary clinic. As an interesting side note, he was apparently financing the project with $50,000 worth of COVID stimulus money that was meant as a business interruption stipend, they call it. Apparently in Idaho, where Rex is from, business interruption and business expansion mean the same thing. I don't know. But he's from Idaho, just so you guys know. The idea that he grew up under the shadow of Rammel Mountain is kind of like Sarah Palin living on the outskirts of Moscow. Anyway, he put a cot and a microwave in a storage closet in that vet clinic so that he could pretend that he lived in that district and run for that seat as well. What could I do? I couldn't withdraw, because if by some weird twist of fate he actually won, Fred Baldwin would have only had to challenge his credentials for run for that office, and we'd ended up right back where we started. I appealed to him and I tried to reason with him, but Mr. Rammel's ego is bigger than my arguing ability, so that didn't work either. The result was that Rex came in a distant third in that race, but with enough votes to give Mr. Baldwin another term and the opportunity to shoot for Rhino of the Year. It doesn't work when it's about me or it's about you. It only works when it's about us working together to get the job done. And I know how hard it is, what I'm asking of you. It's not an easy thing to step back and let somebody else take the limelight. I'm reminded of the story of the widow's mite that we find in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12. The Lord explained to his disciples that her farthing that she was contributing was more valuable and worth more than the buckets of money all the rich guys were bringing and dumping into the treasure, because of what the relative cost to her was. The rich guys could afford it, she could not, and yet she still gave. The small things that we're called upon to do, and even the things we're called upon to not do, to step back from, are often the hardest and require the most sacrifice from us. The cost isn't apparent to others, and we often don't get any credit for it because of that. Still, the sacrifice is real and has great cost. But it's a cost that must be borne. If you are in a race where there are two good conservative candidates and one rhino, figure something out. Flip a coin, rock, paper, scissors, spit wads of 30 paces, I don't care. Come up with a way to reduce it to one conservative against that rhino. It's that important. So now that it's an informed decision, that you've had a chance to think it through, if you're still willing and still want to pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor, and you're willing to lay your pride and your ego and your ambitions on the altar and sacrifice them, then I'm going to invite you to do just that. And I'm going to use what I consider to be the most important and the most inspirational words Patrick Henry spoke that day in Virginia in 1775. He said, "Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle?" Thank you.